Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Friday, March 20th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno on the cusp of one of the biggest draft weekends of the year. Eno, I've got my main event with our buddy JH late Friday night. I think you have a main event coming up this weekend as well. So the biggest drafts of all going down here in the next few days. Today's episode is going to be our annual fantasy baseball cram session. We hope you've been listening for the past several months. If you haven't, if you picked up the show fairly recently, welcome. We'll try to get you caught up as best we can over the next hour or so, give you some good ideas of what you may want to do with your roster construction as draft day rapidly approaches. How's it going for you on this Friday?
It is good. I've got a weekend full, jam-packed full of events and things, and I've got to be a judge at a robot thing on Saturday. I've got to be the game-changer dad at the Little League on Saturday morning. Ozo Motley show tonight, main event Sunday. It's going to be a rocking weekend.
I will be trying to caffeinate as aggressively as possible to keep myself awake as the family bug has made its way to me. I thought I dodged it, man. I felt so proud of myself. I was like, I made it. Got through the gauntlet. Getting to opening day. No.
I am inevitable.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened to me. But onward and upward. So some news as we get started here. Zack Wheeler is lined up to pitch in a minor league game on Monday. Scheduled to throw about 40 pitches there. And this continues to be a progression where Zack Wheeler has been basically a string of encouraging updates over the course of the entire offseason. Coming off of thoracic outlet surgery, it seems like there's a very good chance he's going to return around the end of April, as Matt Gelb has predicted on this show in the last few weeks. And I guess I'm wondering if you've changed your approach with Wheeler, because with the good news, the price has ticked up, but with the good news, there's also the increased confidence that, you know, he's going to get most of a season in Philly, and then the unknown is just how effective he is coming off of surgery, because we've made the comparison between Wheeler and Merrill Kelly, given that that's the type. There's two types of thoracic surgery a player can have. The less severe of the two is the one that Kelly and Wheeler had, so the outcomes are, at least from what we've seen, slightly better in those instances.
Yeah, I mean, it is good news. I just struggle with the fact that I don't have any readings. I don't have any data to actually look at. And I feel like managers lie. I don't know. And I'm trying to resist, moving upwards. I did move them upwards in my rankings between the first and second outputs, but I try to resist pushing them further and further up. I have them below ADP. I'm not really buying shares because, first of all, you have to sort of wait on him. You have to, you're going to have to wait a little bit. It's at least like a Rodon or a Cole situation where you might miss the first 3 weeks to a month of the season. And then on top of that, we don't actually know what he looks like. We just know what people say he looks like.
Yeah, I also think there's a huge difference in a situation like the NFBC leagues with no IL spots and other leagues, which is a larger percentage of leagues that do have IL spots, right? I think the main thing you're looking for with any injured player is the baseline performance on a per inning or per plate appearance level worth stashing away. I think I'm blindly making the assumption that it still is in the case of Wheeler. So, like looking at the Tout Wars Champions League that I was a part of last night, Zack Wheeler went at the late part around 10. So 10-9 was the pick. That'd be pick 117 overall, if I'm doing the math correctly. But there's 3 IL spots in that league, too. So you're not really burned for the time that he's unavailable.
I love that. And I did do that strategy recently, the 12-teamer, where I took Green and Schwellenbach and Joe Musgrove, thinking I would just fill up my IL slots with those guys. However, I am running into a problem. I have to be street legal with my roster on Wednesday. And Wednesday there's one game, and it's only the Yankees against the Giants, which means that people won't be put on their ILs. The only one that's on the IL already for me is Schwellenbach, so he might be the only one I come out of there with, because I have to get this roster ready to compete on Wednesday next week. So look closely at your rules and what your league will look the other way on. If you can run an illegal roster for a day or whatever, I would think about that as well, because they don't always they put them on last second.
Yeah, it's usually 48 hours before the openers, kind of when the window starts to open in a lot of those cases. So you just got to be ready to make things legal in those lineups once you have the opportunity to shuffle those injured guys into those injured spots. I leaned pretty hard into the risk again in the Tout Wars Champions League. Brandon Woodruff in the 14th, his status for opening day still a little bit up in the air. We've talked about that as maybe being
88-mile-an-hour fastballs in his left
I don't know, man. Maybe it was a cutter, Like I know you have the movement profile, and it probably wasn't. But just let me be optimistic about something. I put 3 oft injured but very good pitchers together on this roster, back to back to back between rounds 14 and 16. Brandon Woodruff, Shane McClanahan, and Carlos Rodon. And I said those are my 3 IL spots. McClanahan's healthy right now, so it's really only 2 at the moment, so one available if something else befalls my team. And I thought it's a head-to-head league. It's the only head-to-head league I play in that's not an auto-new league, and that league's also new. So I felt like I was really out of my element putting this roster together, thinking about the 5x5 head-to-head format, trying to make sure that I had a really strong core with about 7 categories that I should be very competitive in every week, and then sort of selectively as the draft unfolded, deciding which one hitting category and one pitching category I might be a little bit light in. In this case, it's probably saves and steals. So I have no idea if I executed a coherent plan or if I built a disaster that will be just pulled apart by my league mates over the course of the season.
I noticed that you had about 100 steals. I thought in my head, and I thought that was a little low, but it is not 0, and so you'll compete. You'll also beat the teams that are fully punting steals, so that's an interesting idea to throw around. You also didn't fully punt saves because you had Daniel Palencia, who I like, and that means that leaves you open for, if the wire works out for me, then I'll have 2 or 3 closers at some point. There were some teams that fully punted, and I will just say generally that head-to-head, I'm much more into fully punting than I am in Roto, and especially if you play in a Roto with an overall factor, I want to be thinking about all the categories, but soft punting, emphasizing certain categories over others is a good way to get through a deep draft for sure. But head-to-head, you can gain superb advantages. The places where I would look to punt are probably saves and steals. Saves are so highly role dependent that the player has no value to you at all if he doesn't get you saves. So that's a reason to punt it. Also, you have to think about co-correlations on the offensive side. If you want to punt one of the different offensive categories, you want to punt the one that doesn't take other ones with it. If you punt homers, it takes RBI with it. Can you punt stolen bases without taking runs with it? Then you can do well. I think one of the easiest to punt is average, because if you're in an average league, you can take high OBP guys with low averages and still be competitive in runs and RBI and homers and stolen bases, but just punt average. So my favorite, I think, to punt in head-to-head situations is average and saves.
Yeah, my thought was this is a 12-team league. I thought most of the other teams in the league would try to do that thing, the first thing you think of, the punt average or steals and saves. Like that would be the combination most people were going to punt. So I wanted to make sure I didn't completely give up on those categories at the point of draft day. But the key there was like waiting for the first closer, like Palencia in the 9th round when closers started getting drafted, I think in round 3. Mason Miller went at 3-3. Edwin Diaz went at 3-9. Joan Duran went at 3-11. So there were teams trying to be a little more aggressive at those top-end spots. I decided to wait there. I also tried to make sure I had a really good batting average foundation in place. My first 4 hitters, Vlad Jr., Yordan Alvarez, William Contreras, Bryce Harper, first 5, even Jackson Merrill, all should be good or great in the batting average category. So that gave me a little bit of cushion to round out the bottom half of my lineup, to catch up on power, to try and be more credible in speed. So I'll see. I'll see if it actually worked out. I have absolutely no idea because I'm just not used to playing in this format. So everybody's team looks amazing to me on paper right now.
Yeah, I mean, we won't actually do pitchers today, so I think we can talk a little bit quickly about reliever strategy, which is just generally I like Ryan Helsley and Daniel Palencia as 2 guys that go lower than the other guys that I think could be as elite as the other guys. But there is an argument for taking one of the elite guys, because if you think about it, if you take an Edwin Diaz and you compare that to taking a Ryan Walker, the difference between Edwin Diaz and Ryan Walker can turn your Cade Horton into what is it, like I'm thinking about it like a high strikeout rate, like a Yamamoto even, or something. You know what I mean? Like, you could give all those extra strikeouts that Diaz has over Walker to your starting pitcher, and you start to see, oh wow, like he actually helps my next starting pitcher a lot by giving me all those extra Ks. So, there's a case to be made for him. I just don't like that there's so much risk where you're adding health risk, and of course relievers have skills risk, because they're kind of small sample year to year, and we try to give the best tools we can to make them less risky, but there's still skills risk, health risk, and role risk. So they're just like the riskiest type of player, maybe in the pool, right? I mean,
yeah, and I think I wonder if the creep up the board is much less extreme in a lot of the non-NFBC leagues out there. Like if you run your home league on ESPN or Fantrax or Yahoo,
closers tend to go later in those, I think.
I imagine Mason Miller's not going to match the ADP that he has in the main event over the last week, where he's going in the early part of round 2. As early as round 1, the range is pick 12 to pick 23 for Mason Miller in main events over the last week, which is... I've done early closer builds in the past. I just am having a very hard time paying up at the top of the board for the prices we're seeing right now with that group. So I've been trying to wait it out a little bit, trying to live in the back part of the Closers I Trust group. And Daniel Palencia was in that pre-WBC, and maybe he moved into that group for some people based on that performance. I imagine he's also going to get a boost in these final 5 to 6 days of drafts, because everything looks good. And entering draft season, there was a little bit of health question just because he was hurt before the postseason, came back and pitched, but then they used him in a different role, right? They used him more in that fireman role, high leverage spots in the middle of the game, as opposed to using him in save specific situations. But that question's been answered by Craig Counsell, so I would not be surprised to see Daniel Palencia kind of push his way into the top 8 closers in some drafts, because it looks like he's the guy on a great team and he's got electric stuff.
You know who doesn't have electric stuff right now?
Don't say it. Don't do it.
Grayson Rodriguez is dealing with a dead arm.
Yeah. Good choice. Good pivot.
He's dealing with a dead arm. I mean, he's been there this spring, which is better than not being there. He's had 12 strikeouts in 12 innings, but also a ton of walks. And the range on his fastball has been up and down, start to start, and within starts, where at times it looks like he's sitting 93. And at other times it looks like he's closer to 96. So now it's a dead arm, and they're just going to roll him back a little bit and maybe not be ready for opening day. So I think that's enough for me to push him down a little bit. But some of this is also baked in. It's like when we talk about the Blake Snell discourse. It's like, well, of course I had him for like 120 innings. I have pushed Blake Snell down to 105 innings now, and he's more like in the 50s, more like a Garrett Cole now or Carlos Rodon. And Grayson Rodriguez, I only had 107 innings for him, but now I'm starting to not trust the projections, which are nice, 3.41 ERA, 27 strikeout rate, because they're based on last year's stuff and not necessarily this year's stuff. And so for Grayson Rodriguez, I'm going to push him all the way down into the 80s somewhere. I mean, let me give you a would you rather, Grayson Rodriguez or Johan Oviedo?
Neither. Oviedo, I guess.
Grayson Rodriguez or Chad Patrick?
Patrick.
Yeah. See, that's where he's got to go. Yeah, unfortunately, Jacob Latz was down in velo at the last couple of innings of his starts. His starts haven't been super great in terms of results, and Kumar Rockers have been going the other direction. So I may have gotten that one wrong, which means I have to revise Jacob Latz. I only had 113 innings for him, but you got to revise that downward to, if he's the 6th starter, that's probably a little bit aggressive for a 6th starter. And then you got to put him around where other 6 starters are. So Jacob Latz is probably falling into the sort of 110 territory instead of being 85th.
Yeah, I mean, Kumar Rocker, a very real threat to that role there. And I was just checking to see if I have Grayson Rodriguez on a few teams. I have him on one team. I've uploaded 14 teams. Some of them are keeper leagues, but 14 teams that have been either drafted so far or have keepers. One team that has Grayson Rodriguez on it so far for me. So I'm probably not getting more of Grayson Rodriguez at this point. I think he was 93 to 96 with the fastball last week Friday when we saw him in spring action last, but just a unfortunate, brutal track record of not being able to stay healthy. So probably more of like a watch list guy for me in 10 and 12 team leagues, where if he's healthy and takes the ball at some point in April or May, sure, I might roster him then, but I don't want to wait through whatever this dead arm period actually is for him, because there's other pitchers in that range that I think you can use right away.
Yeah, Trey Yesavage is headed to the IL with shoulder impingement. I'm revising his innings down to 122 and pushing him down also into that Bieber-Rodon area with Blake Snell. Guys with great projections. You have to wait on a month maybe. And then it's not just the waiting on a month. It's that in that month, worse things can happen, right? As much as, Garrett Cole, maybe Garrett Cole's floating to the top of this little mini group, but as much as, they're progressing or feeling good or whatever it is, like Snell says, the aches are gone or all this stuff, that's a month in which something else can happen. They're not pitching and something else can happen. They might, need another month, or they hurt. Michael King came back and hurt his hamstring. It's like, it's not good that they're hurt currently. So I'm going to put them all in a little mini tier around the 50s. I don't think that there's a real winner. I know that Eric Lauer is going to probably take the spot after Berrios has a an elbow fracture that he didn't feel. It just popped up because they were doing stuff for the WBC. Berrios has to wait a little bit. Bieber has to wait a little bit. I don't love Lauer. I just don't. I'm not buying.
I think he's okay for deeper leagues, kind of in between the rotation and the long man role last year. K rate just under 24%, 3.18 ERA, 1.11 WHIP, not way out of bounds from what he did in Milwaukee in 2021 and 2022. He had 3.19 ERA and a 1.14 WHIP in 2021, 3.69 and 1.22 for those ratios the season after. 23% K rates in those years as well. I think the big difference was a career best walk rate a season ago for Eric Lauer. But I think if you kind of split the difference between 2022 and what the projections are saying, like a very high 3s ERA and like a 1.25 WHIP, that's actually playable on a temporary basis, especially in deeper leagues. So I think I like Lauer a little bit more than you do at this point, but not a guy I'm excited about in 10-team leagues. That'd be an absolute streamer, I think, for a situation like that. But kind of a bummer for Yesavage, because he kind of started this draft season as part of the Fantastic Seven, or whatever we called them, the Chase Burns, Nolan McLean, the Hype Seven, Mizorowski, Schlittler. Like, he was part of that group, and I think this bumps him out of that group just for now, for draft purposes. Like, I'm going to need probably a 75 to 100 pick discount before I'm even thinking about it, and most likely I'm just going to miss out for my remaining drafts on Trey Yesavage. One more note to pass along. Carson Willams could be the opening day shortstop. If you notice that he was sent down to AAA Durham, you might think that's weird. The reason why they can do it is Taylor Walls has an oblique injury, so Taylor Walls is going to end up starting the year on the IL, and Willams will likely get that opportunity while Walls is down to show that he defensively is at least ready for the job and offensively can hold his own well enough to possibly keep it after Walls comes back. But if the plan was to send him down, I feel like the bar that he has to clear to stay up is actually pretty high in terms of what he's going to have to do as a hitter.
Yeah, Willams was a draft and hold and best ball type guy to me because, he's going to have great weeks. He strikes out a lot, so he's going to be a really volatile player, but he has power and speed, and I just wanted him as an option. Now that we're in waiver wire and, shallower league season, I'm not as into Carson Willams because what's the use case for him? It's like bench shortstop that if you took like a week later shortstop, you took like Willy Adames and you just want a little more dynamism or want a little bit more upside, you put Carson Willams on your bench and cross your fingers.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I think it's probably a low average, nice power speed combo if it all starts to work, but there's questions about how long it's going to take for him to make those adjustments. And I think the problem here is that ordinarily, a defender as good as Willams would have a better path to playing time, but Walls is also an elite defender. So you're not winning because of your glove if you're Carson Williams. You got to provide something more with the bat to carve out that opportunity. So yeah, the use case is tough in a lot of shallow leagues right now, but worth keeping an eye on because he is a very toolsy player if he does figure it out. Let's get to some players you've avoided in early rounds.
Players to avoid.
Very, very well done. What causes you to actually stay away from foundational players? Because foundational players, by projection systems, by multiple projection systems, are valuable. They're $20, $25 plus guys that should theoretically be without a lot of concerns. Like what are the most common reasons you're bowing out of having some guys in your foundation, even though the market consistently takes them as top 50 or so overall players?
Well, we know that projections have a weakness when it comes to older players because, especially with older bounce backs, Jeff Zimmerman has done the work where he's shown that older bounce backs, 32 plus projected bounce backs for 32 plus players, are not as believable, not as reliable. So age is a factor for me. And basically what I'm saying is I don't think the market is assessing the risk correctly. I think there's more risk in those players than the market is assessing. And so age is a factor for risk. Health is a factor for risk. And then, maybe lack of track record. I know that we've gotten better at projecting things by using things like bat speed or exit velocities or barrels and stuff like that. And we think that we've really dialed this in. But, sometimes the second year after Jackson Merrill broke out wasn't a great year. There's times when a guy comes up, thinks he's like shown you this level. To some extent, I think of Pete Crow Armstrong in this way. He had a really great season last year. I'm not saying he's not a good player either, because in real life he's a great defender. But that chase rate and that strikeout rate suggests to me, and some of the second half slide and some of the different, like the shape of his season last year, suggests to me that he could have just a regressive season. Like he could still have a great career, but this year could not be as good as last year. Projections are going to give him just about the same because they say, oh, look at the age. He's good. He did this. He hits the ball hard. All that stuff. I get it. A lot of good things about Pete Crow Armstrong, but I find that for a second rounder in 15-team leagues, there's too much risk there for me.
That's been my approach with PCA so far, and I would echo your long-term optimism. I think there's tons of things to like in his profile. I just think it's a slight overcorrection by the draft market in terms of where he's going, although he's sitting in the middle of round 3 of the main event, starting to leak into a territory where I could talk myself into it. The would-you-rathers for hitters, the guys that go after him, though, Yordan Alvarez, I am all in on Yordan Alvarez this year. I just think this is one of those seasons where he's going to do maybe some Aaron Judgian type stuff, so long as he's healthy. Zack Neto being able to get that production from a shortstop with probably, I think, a higher offensive floor. Maybe that's an unfair statement, but I look at Neto and I see a guy that's less likely to have that second half sort of collapse that we saw from PCA. So I think I'd be Neto over PCA in that range too.
You're also seeing White, Langford, and James Wood there, where Wood has some similar issues to Pete Armstrong, but Langford is just a polished hitter with a way higher floor than Pete Armstrong, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm even tempted to push some guys that tend to go well after him ahead of PCA, or to grab my first pitcher in that spot. I like Cole Reagans. I wish I had more of him. Still got time to right that wrong. And the trickiest thing I think right now is trying to decide like where you're going to take those early closer shots. But I am trying my hardest to stay away from closers in the first 4 rounds at least of drafts, because I think you're just giving up a ton of value on the hitting side and even on the starting pitching side if you let that go in favor of chasing those saves early on. Ketel Marte is another guy that goes up pretty early that I just don't end up getting. The projections tell me I should like him. Second base is a weird position. You've described it before as one that's get one early or get one late. Just stay out of the middle. I think that is borne out in some of the projections we've seen. And I know you put together some charts before the show, and Ketel Marte is almost a $30 second baseman. And you get to like the 6th or 7th guy at the position, and you're already into single-digit players. So you can have a pretty big edge with a player like that, and yet I find myself just going a different direction. I find myself taking Jazz Chisholm if I want to get a second base eligible player. I think it's in part because A lot of Ketel Marte's value comes from the batting average category. I like the balance you get from Jazz having that power speed combination, and I have a little more faith in the supporting cast. As good as Arizona's lineup has been each of the last 2 seasons, first in runs in 2024, sixth in runs in 2025, I think the Yankees have just as much, if not more, around Jazz that will ultimately prop up those counting stats a little higher. So I'm willing to take the hit in average basically to get the speed.
I like the long tail of second base, and you can always take Jazz and Ketel and then use one of the late second baseman for your middle infield slot. So that's a way to attack it, and I understand that there's a great advantage to getting Marte and Chisholm, getting a full season from them. Where I am avoiding both of them is the fact that I see a lot of soft tissue, oblique, hamstring issues from both of them that I just feel like are going to crop their way back up. I'm not putting I think the over-under on both of them, is more like a 600 than a 650 in terms of plate appearances, and may even be like a 575 in terms of how much I think they'll play. So I've avoided the beginning of second base for that reason. I don't love second round pitchers. I don't love the sort of middle of the first tier of pitchers. Skubal, Skeens, Crochet, I'm in. Sanchez, Yamamoto, I can get with it. I get it. I'm cool with those 5 because those 5 haven't really given us much in terms of health risk recently. They are 30% strikeout rate guys other than Sanchez. They look like horses right now, and they could be a real advantage over everybody else. Where I start to get nervous is Sale, Wu, Gilbert, DeGrom, even Fried, and I know you like Reagans, but Reagans, that group there is going right behind the first group, and I just think that the injury risk skyrockets in that group. I mean, we're talking about guys who've missed full seasons and had forearm strains and had pec strains and had Tommy John and had multiple Tommy Johns that are on this list. So that's where I get nervous. So I know I have them ranked high, and I have to rank for everybody. And I do believe that talent-wise, they belong where they are. But I just see that the health risk sort of goes through the roof, and I'd rather be doing something else with my pick there. So it's kind of, if you're talking first-tier pitchers, it's early or late for me.
I think Christopher Sanchez is a player that I've really struggled with. I don't have him on any teams so far. Some of that's just where I've been drafting, what I've been doing, and if I'm in the middle of the round, I've been leaning on Skubal. I've got quite a few Skubal starts, so coming back through in round 2, I'm not throwing Sanchez in there on the second for the second pick, right? I don't think that's a good combination, or at least a combination I want to start with. My issue, I guess, with Christopher Sanchez is the K rate jumped a lot last year, 26.3%. This is a good thing. He's always had good control, 5.5% walk rate. It's had 3 years in a row where he's been under 6%. Has that skill. I think the whip's going to be fine. I think the ERA is going to be fine. Do you think the stuff ticked up enough in a sustainable sort of way where he holds a strikeout rate like that again in 2026? Because that could end up being a little bit light relative to the other top tier pitching if he were to lose a little bit of time with even a minor injury, right? Like, in order to be a true ace from a volume perspective with the Ks, I feel like he's either going to improve the K rate some more, which seems unlikely, or have another A health season, which is always tough to bet on for any pitcher at the top of the board.
Yeah, especially for a pitcher that had a big velo boost. We found, Baseball Prospectus had a piece about how pitchers that do surge in velo in a given season are bigger risks going forward. It's the piece is called "Should We Overthrow?" It's a good piece. So I think, I sort of hesitated when I included him in the good health of the top ones. I guess Crochet deserves a little hesitation there as well. But as a starter, he seems to have settled in. So I think there's some health risk on those two guys a little bit, and then there's performance risk. The nice news about Christopher Sanchez is he's kept the 95-mile-an-hour fastball this spring and isn't going to necessarily drop back down. He's not throwing his sliders much for some reason, and he never threw that cutter we wanted him to throw. And so if he falls back down in velo, he is a lefty sinker guy. But he is a lefty sinker guy with good command, and who's going to have a high floor because he's going to keep the ball on the ground. So, there's some similarities with Logan Webb, where Logan Webb popped early in his career in terms of strikeout rate, and then he returned to a much more normal place. And the nice thing with Sanchez is if you take him and he returns to where Logan Webb was for all those times, you took a guy in the second round and he returns you like fourth or fifth round value. It's not going to turf your season, Whereas I feel like you could take DeGrom or something. He misses half the season, or he misses the first 2 months, or something happens, and that could really hurt your season because that's a high pick that you maybe had to drop because you didn't have a place to put him.
Yeah, I think you could look at the skills difference from 24 to 25 with Sanchez and say maybe that's as concerning as Yamamoto missing half of that year with an injury. Like, as far as your second round risk goes, I just found it really weird that as good as Sanchez is, I have not drafted him at all yet here in 2025, but I think that's a good comp with Logan Webb. Gives you an idea where that floor can be in a year where everything doesn't go quite as well as it did a year ago. Thinking about the positional shapes, though, like that seems like a really important thing. If you were just prepping right now for a draft this weekend or early next week, knowing where the drop-offs are, where the tier breaks are, is critically important, right? Because it helps you make some decisions that might be coin flips in the moment by projection, but you accrue more value if you can avoid cliffs in the places where they exist. So I'm curious, as you've studied the draft boards and the way the projections are shaped this year, where do you see some of the steepest drop-offs that you're trying to avoid being on the wrong side of?
If you're looking at these positional shapes graphs that we're putting up on YouTube while we're talking, the highlighted player is always the 12th best player, or in the case of Outfield, 36th. I just wanted to give you a sense of where shallower leagues, where the bottom is. So that in this case with catchers, JT Realmuto looks like the 12th best catcher. If you take Drake Baldwin over him, I support that. Today I bold predicted Drake Baldwin into being the best catcher in baseball. So, I think take Drake Baldwin over JT Realmuto. I just want you to know that JT Realmuto is the least, projected, the least best option, for in the top 12 among projections. I use the bad X. But you can clearly see that Cal Raleigh stands above everyone else. But then there's a nice top tier of 6 players that includes Goodman, Langoliers, Contreras, Smith, Sal Perez, and Ben Rice. That's a group that projects clearly about $5 better than anybody else, and they're clear. And what I wanted to point out is, especially in 2-catcher leagues, only Contreras, Goodman, and Cal Raleigh really have a chance at 600 plate appearances. Maybe you can throw Ben Rice and Sal Perez in there, but that's why they are projected higher. That's why they're actually worth it, because 600 plate appearances from them, what are you going to get from Bo Naylor? 450? So that's a lot of extra value, RBIs, runs, just a lot of playing time. So I do think getting one of those top 5 or 6 is tantamount. It's been a lot of Will Smith for me, but I have William Contreras, and I have Hunter Goodman. I have some of these top shares because they're worth it to me. I at least want one of those guys. And then the middle of catching this year is super exciting. A lot of young players, a lot of bounce backs. Gabriel Moreno looks, like he could bounce back. Augustin Ramirez, Alejandro Kirk had a great year. Yander Diaz, nobody loves him. Samuel Basayo is everybody's favorite bold prediction. He's trouncing the ball this spring. But even like a Ryan Jeffers and Austin Wells to me are, they're the guys that are slipping because they're boring veterans and people are going for Cardo Jensen. And so I don't actually have as many shares of this hype, young catcher group in the middle. I've been kind of, second catcher territory for me has been Wells and Jeffers and some of the veterans that I think will have good seasons and don't cost as much.
Yeah, I've tried to, in many of my 2-catcher leagues, get somebody out of that top 8 or 9 at the position. I like William Contreras for the playing time reasons you mentioned. Also like that he does the high volume thing at catcher with a really good batting average floor. I think that helps a lot too. Comparatively gives you a big advantage at the position. Will Smith ends up on a lot of my teams every year. He seems a little underdrafted. I'm with you on Austin Wells. Dylan Dingler's kind of interesting in 2-catcher leagues too. Great defender. Got to the power last year. I think he's maybe a little underrated. And then Ryan Jeffers, I think, is also worth the mention. But yeah, like that mid-range is not bad. Like you can talk yourself into Adley having a bounce back. You could look at Alejandro Kirk and just say the floor is really good because the average and run production will be solid. There's a lot of different ways to play catcher this year, which is kind of nice because there have been years in the past we played where there have been some massive cliffs where you couldn't really find anything good after the first dozen or so were off the board. I feel like you really only get burned if you wait too long for the second catcher in a 15-team league.
Bo Naylor territory. I like Bo Naylor, but it gets a little hairy down there.
It makes you nervous when you actually roster him. Like you can like him in theory, and you put him on your team, you're like, ooh, is this going to work? It's a good plan until it's your plan, is the way I've looked at it with Bo Naylor so far. Hopefully this is the year. I've liked him for a few years. I've thought for a while he could break out. First base is kind of interesting. I think mostly I'm just trying to avoid the very end of the position. By that I mean after the 14th or 15th first baseman is off the board. The guys that I think are useful corners are not guys that I want to have starting as my first baseman. I think the reason for this is something we've talked a lot about. Eventually you start to lose playing time because some of those guys further down the board end up as big side platoon guys, or they can just lose their job outright. So they might project to have enough power and enough run production for you, but if you wade into that part of the pool and you're wrong, it ends up being a really difficult position to play catch up at. So I've been targeting plenty of early first basemen. I've got a little bit of Nick Kurtz. I've got a decent amount of Vlad Jr. on my teams so far this year in my foundations. That has forced me to chase some speed in the middle and late rounds, but I feel comfortable with that. Wilson Contreras, if you said pick one that's like not inside the top 12 at the position that you think could actually sneak into that group, I actually think Wilson Contreras is a little bit underprojected and a little bit underrated going into Boston. We've talked about that as the best hitter's park he's ever played in. It's going to be right in or around that cleanup spot this year for a Boston lineup that might be a little light on home run pop, but it's certainly not light on high quality bats overall. They're going to score a ton of runs there, and I think Wilson Contreras is going to be right in the middle of it.
Yeah, Vlad Guerrero Jr. is a guy by projections that should go in the first round that goes in the second round. So that's been, on a lot of my teams. Yandy Diaz is a guy that belongs in the top 8 or so by projections at first base and does not go there. So I've got a lot of Yandy Diaz. Alec Burleson, I have a fair amount of shares for. He shows up here as the 12th guy. He's the highlighted guy. I also think of him as a good bellwether in terms of ADP as, if you have a queue at first base and Alec Burleson is one of the last 1 or 2 names on it, or 2 or 3 names on it, then you need to take a first baseman. That's I feel like he's the canary in the coal mine a little bit. Like once Alec Burleson's one of the best first basemen available in your draft, you need to take a first baseman if you haven't yet, because then you can take Burleson. Wilson Contreras is I think around there. Sometimes Vinny Pasquantino, Soderstrom, those guys. You need to take one of those guys because it does get bad after that. You get Murakami's risk that he's not viable major leaguer. He's a 38% strikeout rate guy. Sal Stewart's on a team that has millions of options at every position. Aranda is on a team that has millions of options at every position. Spencer Torkelson has been in the minor leagues recently. Andrew Vaughn was released by his last team. Christian Walker was shopped by his team all year. Jake Berger was hurt all year. So Josh Bell is on like a $3 million contract. You don't want those guys. You want to stay out of those guys. The other the interesting canary in the coal mine is Michael Busch. We've talked about him on the Chicago episode as well as the first base episode. You need to make up your mind if you think he's being platooned or not. If you think he's being platooned, he's out of the circle of trust. If you don't think he's being platooned, he's in. Yeah.
And I think the general reaction of Sahadev Sharma, who joined us for that Cubs preview, is that he's less likely to be platooned. So if you want to follow Sahadev's lead on that one, I wouldn't blame you. Busch exceeding expectations in Chicago so far, could do it again here in 2026. Mentioned earlier our split on which of the top second basemen we'd be likely to draft, but as far as the later guys go, I think we have a lot of agreement. Ozzy Albies is a guy that I've been circling. Every time I can get him around that pick 150 mark, I feel like I've done really well at that position because so much of what we've seen in the last couple of seasons has been decline around injuries. I don't think it's actual skills loss. We're still talking about a guy who's not even 30 yet. I mean, Ozzy Albies is, because he got up so young, I think we have this idea in our head that he's 31, 32 years old. He just turned 29 in January.
Yeah. And, he's the highlighted guy here, the 12th best projection. So that's a good place to be. You can see how flat this position is. You've got Cattell and Jazz at the top. And then there's really, yes, Bryce Turang is like a $12, $13 player. I get it. Nico Horn is an $11 player. But after that, it's really 8, 7s, and 6s for about 10 guys. And so you could just take your pick, whoever falls. Marcus Semien is a guy who falls. I think that's more of a 15-team strategy. Bryson Stott falls behind Ozzie Albies a lot, and I think him and Albies project about exactly the same. I've kind of have them both on cues and say, all right, you take one, I take the other. Matt McLean has been playing really well this spring, and he has the same kind of 2020 type skills that Stott and Albies have. So I don't mind any of those guys, and I'll just put them on a big old queue and leave it at the bottom of my queue and wait to see until it's. I don't really want to have Jonathan India or Jake Cronenworth or Ernie Clement or Jorge Polanco. I want to stay out of that. The very tail end of that, it gets down to $1 and $2 players and some negative players that I don't want filling my MI. I think a shortstop is going to fill my MI in most leagues because I think they're better, but I love taking a late one. Ozzie Albies also has a new first base coach, and they could change their strategy in the spring pretty quickly in terms of stealing more bases. And all of a sudden, if he's 20-30 this year, hey, that's a huge value for where he's going.
Yeah, it absolutely would be. McLean, as I think I mentioned on Thursday, climbing up boards, going around pick 132 overall now in the main event. So it's going to cost you a little bit more. He's going to pop ahead of the likes of Albies and Bryson Stott in terms of where he's likely to go. So just be mindful of that if he's the one you prefer in that group. The guy that I also like at second base for is, at least in leagues that have IL spots, but even in leagues that don't, because the timetable shouldn't be that long, is Jackson Holliday. I think we're getting a pretty big discount on him, especially when you consider that the discounts on Lindor and Carroll are quite a bit smaller. Like, there are still discounts in the magnitude of moving even a half round at the top of the board versus dropping 4 or 5 rounds in the middle of the board. Like, that's actually closer to even than you might think. But Holliday, right around pick 200 right now, probably isn't going to miss that much time. I'm still intrigued by what he might be able to do here in year 3 in the big leagues. You mentioned shortstop, plenty of depth there. I mean, the weird situation I ran into in my labor league was having to try to find the shortstops that hit for average and steal bases in the middle rounds. Usually you're giving up average to do that. You're going with Trevor Story, Dansby Swanson. I needed to keep my average up in that build, and I ended up on Geraldo Perdomo, which, look, he might be fine. I think there's a couple of weird things that happen at shortstop. The weird I anticipated was the possibility of having Corey Seager, the classic shortstop that does everything except for run, and I ended up going kind of inside out, having to find a very specific player to fit my build because of what I did in the earlier rounds.
You put yourself in the need of a fixer.
Yeah, like an early round fixer is not really what you want. Like the late round fixers we talked about last Friday, like that's fine because if you're wrong, okay, the waiver wire is probably going to provide you enough relief. But if you're missing in round 5, round 6 on a player that sort of adjusts the course and balances out your foundation, that could be a pretty big problem.
There are 22 shortstops that I like, and they keep their value pretty high. You can see from Corey Seager to CJ Abrams, you basically have like 8 or 9 shortstops in a row that are $15 players. Take them. Take them early. Take them middle. Take them late. Take as many shortstops as you can. They're the most athletic guys on the field. They are young. They are, proven competitors that usually have speed. So they usually are 5 category guys. They're the best athletes on the field. So I would take as many shortstops as you can cram onto a roster. I would do it. Do I have favorites? Yeah, sure. Corey Seager is really cheap, and he's been a fun way to get some like CI type stats from middle infield, but you have to think about steals. I like Zach Neto. I think he can go 30-30 this year. I have Trey Turner. He's just, his speed gives him such a good floor. Ellie and any of those guys. I love the early guys. I'll focus on a little bit real quick on the late guys. I like Mason Wynn. I think he can go 15-15 this year. So I think he's one of the latest, that I'm happy to take. And then Dansby Swanson is falling in drafts. I don't know why. He's very boring, but he seems to have a very high floor for me. So Dansby Swanson and Mason Wynn are my favorite later game shortstops.
Yeah, I think Ezekiel Tovar fills the void that Mason Wynn fills for you. Like I think being in Colorado, the average floor is really steady. All the projection systems have him in the 260 range. I know it's going to be a low OBP, so if you're in an OBP league, he's probably not an ideal fit there. 26 homers in 2024, had injuries last year, did lower the K rate slightly. It's a very aggressive, free-swinging approach.
I think he's a little over-projected on steals, too.
Yeah, and that's the category that, compared to your other middle infielders that are going to help you maybe get 15 or so bags, you might be getting half that many from Tovar because he hasn't been that efficient yet, and we haven't really seen any big volume seasons from him as a base stealer in the big leagues. It's always the possibility, new coaches, new philosophies in Colorado, things can change relatively quickly. We're talking about a 24-year-old. He's a great defender. He's going to play every day. He's probably going to be at or around the top of that order. So I just think the average, the power, and the run production where he goes is actually going to be just fine. It's just a little goofy. You got to be pretty happy with the amount of speed you've already banked to that point if you want to take advantage of Tovar where he's going as your MI. Third base for me actually has a player that I've been avoiding, and I don't have a reason. Eugenio Suarez, like what's not to like? He moved back into an environment that boosts home runs at Great American Ballpark. He should play every day. Beloved by teammates. Like what the main concern, I guess, is just age-related decline. I feel like we've been calling it for 2 or 3 years now for Suarez, and he's 34 at this point, so the swing and miss we're seeing is not going to get better at this stage of his career. But we were talking about Mike Trout in our projections draft, and it's similar in terms of the quality of contact. 14.3% barrel rate for Suarez, 29.8% K rate's the yellow flag or the red flag we're looking at. But he popped 49 homers last year, and he's shown a remarkable track record of staying healthy. Going back over the last 4 seasons, Eugenio Suarez doesn't have a season in which he's finished with fewer than 629 plate appearances. So he's a high-volume player moving into another good situation park-wise with his return to Cincinnati, and yet I have him nowhere, even though the projections tell me that he's the best player on the board for a round or two when I'm building out those foundations.
He reminds me a little bit of Kyle Schwarber a couple years ago, where you just have this 210 batting average possibility that you're just like, woof, if that happens, that really is going to be a drag. 650 plate appearances with a 210 batting average is not exactly what I want, dragging my whole team down. And then Suarez is, we've talked about how his contact point is going further and further out in front. Like he's really doing the old guy thing, which is, I'm going to swing as hard as I can, as early as I can, and try to hit that pull side homer, and it's going to mean a lot of strikeouts, but this is how I'm getting paid. I also think the market gave us a little bit of a hint, right? The market was not that in on him. It was the Pirates and the Reds, and they were offering really short-term deals. So I think the market can sometimes, the actual free agent market can tell you something. In terms of this position in general, I think this is the steepest drop-off of any position. I think that you see that like you want an elite third baseman because the bottom is bad. Jonathan India is, a like maybe the 16th or 17th best projected guy. He's projected for like $1. Carlos Correa is in the top 18 at this position. Nolan Arenado's in the top 18 at this position. Do you want to start any of those guys? There's some buzz in Reds camp that Noelvi Marte might go down because his defense has been atrocious and his plate skills have been really bad this spring. I mean, I don't want a late third baseman at all. The only one I want, I've gone on record on this show. I like Caleb Durbin. I take a lot of Caleb Durbin. He papers over a Corey Seager. I've done the Corey Seager Caleb Durbin combo, where you're basically getting your MI stuff from your third baseman, from your CI, and you're getting your CI stuff from your MI. I've done that. So Caleb Durbin I like late. Alec Boehm is fine. Sal Stewart is exciting. Miguel Vargas is fine. There are some ways to paper over not getting an elite guy, but the elite guys are all $20 guys. And the guys I just talked about were $5 and $3 guys. So you want an elite guy. The worst elite guy that you should get is Matt Chapman. I think that's the worst elite guy you should get. I think you really should get Austin Riley if you don't get Junior Caminero, Jose Ramirez. And that's what I've been doing. I have a ton of Riley. And I think, if it's Jazz, if it's Michael Garcia, if it's Manny Machado, it's fine. Just get one of those guys because third base gets dirty quick.
It really does. I find myself choosing between Riley and Michael Garcia a lot, and I also have Chapman as sort of like the last acceptable starter. I like Alex Bregman more than most, even though the wind at Wrigley Field in particular might dampen that power a little bit. I think he just controls the zone really well. Still going to be a very good player, even if he's not elite at this point in his career. The guy that I throw the most darts at kind of after that, from that long tail, like, now what do I do? Sometimes it's for a CI, sometimes third base is the last position I fill in a 15-team league. It's actually Max Muncy. Got 5 teams so far this season with Max Muncy on them, so he's one of my more rostered players. I think once he got that astigmatism fixed, corrected his vision last year, made all the difference in the world. As they get healthier, once Kike Hernandez is back in the picture especially, it's going to be a big side platoon situation, so you have to account for that. But I'm calculating or hoping in my mind that even being a big side platoon guy in that Dodgers lineup props the counting stats up enough at this price for Muncy to make it work while losing those starts.
Yeah, I've been trying to really stay out of that long tail. I've got a couple Addison Bargers. I'm just hoping that he plays more than just big side platoon. There are some big side platoon guys here. Isaac Paredes, had a real issue with playing time, and I think he might still, because Pena, I don't think he's going to be out long if he's out at all, in terms of opening day. So, Josh Young, Jordan Westberg is an interesting idea, but what if he can't throw? What if he gets TJ? What is that solution then? I think you just want to stay out of that. Royce Lewis is a $0 player by the Bad X in 15 teams. I think that's an okay dart thrower to take, because it's like, okay, either he's healthy and he's way better than a $0 player, or he's not healthy and I'm dropping him. It's like, I think Royce Lewis is actually an acceptable risk in deeper leagues. I don't know if I'm super excited to take that risk in any other leagues.
Yeah, Royce Lewis has had a really long road, right? It's multiple ACL tears, soft tissue problems with his legs, 46 homers in about 1,000 career big league plate appearances. So, it's like mid-20s home run pop for full seasons. 18 for 21 as a base stealer, including 12 for 14 last year in just 106 games. And a lot of that was concentrated at the end of the year when the Twins just said, F it, let's run. So he still has a lot of the tools that made him really interesting when he broke through. It's, health grade F type situation, but maybe a health grade F type situation for a guy that turns 27 in June isn't as bad as health grade F for a guy that turns 34 this summer, right? Like the possibility of him doing something similar to what Byron Buxton did and just being out there for 550 or 600 plate appearances certainly exists. So I do like him as a kind of as a shallow league last chance option. See what happens. He went a little bit weak at third base. You want an interesting flyer. I think Royce Lewis still ticks that box. Outfield, I mean, I guess the question here is it any different than it ever is? I feel like it's the position that if it changes, we're somewhat less likely to notice it because it's just so deep. And there's so many players that bring each different combination of categories to the table. Like in my mind, like, oh yeah, this is just the outfield. It was like that last year and the year before that too, and I don't really worry about it from a scarcity standpoint. Almost from a roster construction perspective, it's more making sure I don't fill too many outfield spots early, right? If it's a 3 outfielder league, I don't want 2 outfielders out of my first 3 hitters. If it's a 5 outfielder league, I don't want to have 4 outfielders in my first 10 or 12 picks, because then I'm missing out on some really intriguing late value options that I like. So to me, it's just like making sure I don't go overboard with stars at the position and then miss out on all the possible value that can be there in the back half of the draft.
Yeah, I think that's good, because you're not missing out on the stars. There are some great stars here. We talk about 5 outfielders that are $30 players, and another 4 or 5 that are $25 players. So this is a great position to get, power, speed, everything, 5-tool players. You cannot just ignore it. What I like to try and do is get one of those top guys, put all the $20 outfielders in my queue and try to get one of them. Put all the $15 outfielders in my queue, try to get one of them. One thing I do want to avoid is the reverse red paperclip thing that DVR talks about, which is the idea that you could say, oh, why take Jaron Duran here when I can take O'Neal Cruz here? Why take O'Neal Cruz here when I can take Brenton Doyle here? Why take Brenton Doyle here when I can take Michael Harris here? You can do that with outfield, and then all of a sudden you've got like Jung-Hoo Lee and Cedric Mullins and Ryan O'Hearn in your outfield, and you're saying, oops, I think I waited too long. So
Yeah, you get platoon guys usually.
Yeah, so I think you need to. Yes, that's the big thing. You need to avoid platoons. And where Brian Reynolds, he's the guy that's highlighted here as a 36 outfielder. He's really interesting because it's right around there where you start to go from guys that play all the time to the guys that might get platooned. And so I do want my top 3 guys to make sure I don't get platooned. That's why I end up with a lot of Elliot Ramos because he's right-handed, Jordan Beck because he's right-handed. I like getting right-handed outfielders in the mid rounds, or switch hitters like Ian Happ. They're boring. Ian Happ is boring, but if his hamstrings are healthier, maybe he'll steal a couple more bags. But getting switch hitters and right-handers in those middle rounds can be really important because even 3 or 4 guys after Ryan Reynolds, Wilyer Abreu, we love Wilyer Abreu. He looks like a really great player. Is he going to get platooned? If he gets platooned in your weekly league, or even if you're in a daily league, you have to have a caddy for him. You have to have another player. So what I try to do is make sure that the top 3 outfielders I have are not going to get platooned. And then I do a thing where I take my last 2 outfielder spots, the utility spot, and maybe a bench spot or 2 to get like 4 outfielders for 3 spots or 5 outfielders for 3 spots, where I know that Evan Carter and Josh Lowe and Jesus Sanchez and Jorge Soler and all these guys may have caddies, may have some playing time situations where they lose playing time. So I'm going to have options. Even in weekly leagues, I want to be like, ooh, Lowe's going up against 3 or 4 lefties this week. Going to choose Evan Carter instead. So that's why. It also is why Jorge Soler and Cam Smith had ended up a lot of my rosters because they are right-handers, and I'm just hoping, hey, maybe I luck into a guy who plays all the time.
Yeah, Smith in particular, probably one of our most mentioned players over the last 5 or 6 months. I think we both like him where he's going. It seems like he's an important part of what the Astros are going to try to do in 2026 and for several years beyond that. But it's really important to keep an eye on what's going to be enough to break a platoon situation. Like usually it's defense and center field is the thing you're looking for.
Harrison Bader.
Bader as a righty can play more than he
he's
ordinarily
a righty,
would because of his
yeah.
defense, but even for him, like I feel like a lot of his best work as a hitter is done against lefties, but he's such a good defender, it pushes him into the lineup more against righties. That's where I think that appeal on Colton Cowser has been for me, and Evan Carter. I think Carter of the 2 even more so because there's less depth around him in Texas, just jumps off the page as not only a speed fixer, like you're light on speed, but also a guy that probably plays more than on the big side of platoon because of the defensive ability he brings at an important position.
We haven't talked a lot about him, but Justin Crawford, there's an argument to be made that glove will keep him in there. And if the glove is positive, then he'll be in there. And it's like, I think Victor Scott is a very flawed hitter, but I love having him as my first bench hitter, as a guy who, I'm a little bit low on steals. I'm going to take Victor Scott and play him over Josh Lowe when Josh Lowe hits the lefties. You know what I mean? I'm just going to try to massage a couple extra steals into my lineup by having him always available, even if he hits 220 with, 7 homers and 35 steals. It's not something I necessarily want to plug in there every day, unless it's a mono league.
Still probably a big price gap between Clark and Victor Scott, but I like Denzel Clark more than Victor Scott at this point if you're trying to find a player that should play a ton for his defense and has a lot of different ways to get better at the plate. Random quick question for you before we get to our next segment. Who do you think my most rostered player is among all hitters across the leagues that I have drafted, and this counts keeper leagues as well? I have this player in 7 out of my 14-team leagues.
Oh, Garrett Mitchell.
No. How much Garrett Mitchell do I have? I have 2 teams of Garrett Mitchell.
Okay. Who is it?
A very reasonable number. He's a good player. This is a top 100 pick pretty easily. Went a lot earlier in drafts last year.
Dylan Cruz or no?
No, I went really early last year, and now he's like 5th, 6th round.
Teoscar Hernandez, Jackson Merrill. That high?
Boom. Jackson Merrill.
There it
most
is,
rostered
Merrill.
player.
Yeah.
Really important player on my teams this year. I need to be right about Jackson Merrill, otherwise I've got some problems to deal with across several rosters.
I think he could steal more because he had hamstring issues last year. Also, Merrill, I think that people understand that he is elite when it comes to barrel control. I mean, he can touch pitches that other people can't touch. I know he hasn't stolen a base this spring, but I could see 8, 9, 10 from him. It's going to be a really good average, and if he hits 25 steals with that, 25 homers with that, that's going to be a great package.
Yeah, still developing power, so just excited to get that discount we've been getting on Jackson Merrill so far. I've got a lot of shares of Jacob Melton, though, too. He got sent down, unfortunately, to start the year. A lot of draft and hold shares, so it wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility throughout the winter, but I got a little too excited about Melton, I think, over the last couple of months. Some big rookie darts. Usually we see rookies start to take off in the final days leading into opening day because we start to get more clarity about their actual paths to making the roster. And this year's group, I think, is at least 3 deep, maybe 4. I mean, Connor Griffin, J.J. Weatherholt, Kevin McConaughey, maybe Carson Ben just starting to play his way at least into the group, even though I think he'd be 4th out of 4 in terms of
anybody who's still
skills.
In camp.
Yeah, and there's a long list of guys that have been getting optioned down that we may talk about in detail in this episode, or may just kind of sprinkle into the next couple episodes. Have you been drafting any of Griffin, Weatherholt, and McConaughey in your redraft leagues?
I haven't. I'm risk averse, and maybe to not my benefit, maybe to my detriment. I'm, there was an interesting tweet by Rob Silver, where he was talking about. Why he's taking Kevin McGonigal. And he said Kevin McGonigal's going around the 180s. And where he goes, J.P. Crawford went last year. And J.P. Crawford hit 265 with 12 homers and 8 stolen bases last year. And Silver's point was McGonigal can clear that bar pretty easily. Well, the BAT-X projection for Kevin McGonigal is 254, 12 homers, 9 stolen bases, which is makes both of us right. So I'm saying, well, I'd rather have the sure thing, and I'm hoping for more than 265, 12-8 from that draft slot. So, I'm going to take a surer thing. He's saying, if they're both projected for the same number, take the guy who's younger. Take the guy who's could easily. I know he said will easily surpass that, and I think that's where I take issue. That's where my alarm bells go off. No, it's not. He's not. He could easily just hit 12 homers and steal 8 bases this year and play in 3/4 of the year. That's an easy outcome. That's the median outcome. But I think, maybe if we press Silver, he might be saying can easily surpass that. And where he goes, you're talking about half your team won't even make it to the end of the year on your team anymore. So if it's a 50-50 chance that guy even makes it to the end of your team, then take the guy who, if he makes it to the end of the year on your team, will have given you a lot better for that draft slot.
Right. Is it more likely that the 21-year-old who is, if not the best prospect in baseball, is at or near the top of that list? Is it more likely he exceeds expectations, or is it more likely that the guy we've seen already, who's now 31 years old, is going to break his projection? I think that was probably Rob's point. It's much more likely to be McGonigal getting that done. Griffin, if I was going to draft just one of the 3, Griffin's the most ridiculous ceiling of the bunch, but I'm having a hard time trusting the Pirates because, as we talked about with Keith Law on the show, it's just 21 games above Double-A. There's a better chance than not that they give him a little bit of time at least at Triple-A, make sure that everything looks good there, and then bring him up maybe in late April, early May if they want to try and make a run at the NL Rookie of the Year award for the prospect promotion incentives, right? That would still be in play, and it wouldn't necessarily be doing wrong by a guy who's 19 years old with that little experience above high A. So I've been hesitant to take Griffin in redraft leagues, not because I don't think he's going to be awesome, but because I think we're going to have to wait a little while, and there can be growing pains even for future elite players.
Yeah, he slowed down a little bit this spring. There's still a little bit more strikeout rate than you'd like, a little bit less walk rate. The power is great, but other than that, he's had only a couple hits other than the homers. So you could make the argument that he needs a little more polish. He hasn't played that much in the minor leagues. 563 plate appearances is his entire minor league history, and that's spread over 3 different levels. So it's easy to make the argument he's not ready, and they may do that. I do think there's this weird thing where Paul Skeens they did the same thing with Paul Skeens, and they got themselves in double trouble where Paul Skeens got the full year of service time, and they didn't get any reward as a team for Paul Skeens winning the Rookie of the Year. They may think about that and say, "Oof, we don't want to make the same mistake again." If Griffin comes up and wins, the Rookie of the Year after 2/3 of a season, then holding him down did us no benefit. So I think that's why he's still in camp. They're still thinking about this. He's up against Alika Williams for, I think, the last roster spot there. So, you may think, is he better than Alika Williams? Probably, let's just take him, So that's what I think with Kevin McGonigal, too. When you look at the shortstop options for the Tigers, you're looking at Javi Baez, who gives you no bat anymore. He hasn't been above league average for like 4 years. And then you have Zach McKinstry, who doesn't really give you shortstop level glove. So McGonigal's the only guy that could maybe give you above average bat and a shortstop glove in a way that looks like a starting shortstop. So I think some of these options, they don't have options, but Griffin's would you rather is a little bit tougher for me. He's going around the same place as somebody like Alejandro Kirk in 2-catcher leagues, Ozzie Albies, who we just said we liked. He's going where I like Tatsuya Imai, but there's also Edward Cabrera, Shane Baz, a lot of good pitchers going there. So there's you're giving up a lot of, like, Samuel Basayo is going like around after Connor Griffin. Like, I don't know, man. There's a lot of upside there. A lot of prospect people loved him. Why not take him, and be more assured of playing time probably. So I think Connor Griffin's a little bit too hot for where he is, but McGonigal and Weatherholt, their would you rathers are more reserved. It's Gleyber Torres, Kerry Carpenter, Austin Wells, Xander Bogaerts. I mean, yeah, okay, maybe I'll take a McGonigal.
I keep looking at the group and thinking Weatherholt is the one that maybe I'm most likely to draft on any given day. I mean, pick 220 or so is where he goes. His would you rathers end up being Jorge Polanco, Brandon Lau, Kaz Okamoto, Max Muncy. I mean, it's like, if you're just looking on the infield, like, that's very reasonable. We've seen power, we've seen speed, we've seen more walks and strikeouts so far this spring. Weatherholt's a guy that would have gone 1-1 potentially in his draft class if not for an injury during his final year at West Virginia. Like, you're getting an elite prospect there as well. Like, the gap in the short term might not be that wide. So that might be kind of the sweet spot for me if I'm trying to get on here. And I think the best case scenario, I'm like, okay, what would it take for me to use an 11th round pick on Connor Griffin in the main event with JH on Friday night? And I'm like, 10 super projectable, boring picks before that. Like,
yeah, right.
Have I done nothing fun
load
yet?
up on floor before you do that.
The 10 round like best floor roster I've ever built, and I'm like, all right, let's take a shot. And if we're wrong in the 11th round, and he takes forever to come up, we'll have to cut him. But even that's going to be hard if they do send him down, and you're stuck waiting for.
That's my main question: is how long are you going to hold him?
Yeah,
how long are you going to hold him? Realistically, it's week 4 of the season. You still have him on your thing, and you're like, he's coming up in 2 weeks.
I want to do it. I want to play that way, but I'm trying to be more rational about how I'm approaching prospects in places where the resources are limited. Now, if you're playing in a 10-team league and you're just saying, what do I do with my 5 bench spots? Absolutely. Draft a player like Connor Griffin, use a bench spot for that, because you can play off the waiver wire, turn the waiver wire into your bench, and filter in more boring players as you need to if Griffin doesn't get the call up when you want. So big difference for me in terms of like shallow league versus deep league and how aggressive I want to be in these spots. But Carson Bench was the other name I mentioned. I don't think we've talked a lot about him on the show, but he's having a nice spring, and they have an opportunity in that outfield, still going outside the top 300 in main event drafts too. So that could be a late riser for you as you're looking ahead to this weekend.
Yeah, and like if you think Cam Smith strikes out too much or whatever, Benj is like kind of the opposite, where he's a little bit more polished and doesn't really have the tools to have, I think, the very top-end outcomes. But that polish might make him hit the ground running faster. He may just be, their center fielder. I think we should take the stashes to consider. We've got a list of stashes. These are players that have been optioned that may be back quickly. Let's put that on the Discord and start a little chat about it.
We'll put the full list in there and chatter about it. I mean, tons of guys that are AA and above that are going to contribute in the big leagues this year have been sent down. Every team sent guys down like that. Is there one in particular that you want to call out on the show that you were going to wait for a couple of weeks in the scenarios we were just outlining? We're talking
That
about
I
the
might
lack of
actually
patience with.
stash.
Yeah, because we're talking about the lack of patience with Griffin potentially as an 11th round pick, but most of the guys that have been optioned are probably going after round 20, and at that point, you could move on if you're not happy a couple weeks into the season if the opportunity doesn't open up as quickly as you'd like.
I think it's not going to be a pitcher because my pitcher slots on my bench have a high velocity. I'm moving through those guys. I don't think I'm sticking around waiting too long for a starter. As much as I like Tanner McDougal, Blade Tidwell, and Christian Scott a lot, especially Britt reminded me of his excellence, and I think he might actually be the best depth guy right now over Jonah Tong for the Mets. As much as I like those guys, I'm not going to wait too long for them because I don't know when they're going to come up. I think that something like a Christian Moore thing could be, playing games with rosters. You look at Vaughn Grissom being out of options. They may try to, start the season with Vaughn Grissom. If he's not playing that well, they may DFA him and hope that people don't have spots on their rosters. This is a game that Farhan Zaidi used to play all the time with the Giants. So, go to war on opening day with the guys that have no options. If they don't play well, if Vaughn Grissom doesn't play well for 2 weeks and Christian Moore has 5 homers in AAA or whatever, I feel like that decision can be one they can unmake pretty easily. So I look at Christian Moore. I look at Ryan Waldschmidt even. I thought he looked really good and seems really close. I don't know. Is there anybody, do you agree? I mean, maybe even Bryce Eldridge, because they may be trying to, get, who is it? Gerard Encarnacion. Like, they may be trying to give him one last shot, because he's out of options. And, who's going to make this team because Bryce Eldridge doesn't? It's somebody like Gerard Encarnacion and Drew Gilbert in some sort of weird outfield DH platoon, right? Well, they could pull the plug on that pretty easily and say, okay, Eldridge, come on back.
Yeah, I think it could be about trying to sneak a guy through waivers later as opposed to trying to sneak him through waivers when everyone's freeing up spots on their roster. So that might be part of the calculus there as far as sending Bryce Eldridge down and holding Encarnacion on the roster. The name that I was thinking about, just from there's like 20 or so on the list, I was thinking about actually one of the pitchers. I was thinking about Tanner McDougal because I don't know how long the White Sox really want to trot out that current starting 5 top to bottom. Like, I don't get the sense that it's very long. Like Shane Smith, I'm a little higher on him than you are, I think, coming off of what he did last year. But Sean Burke, I feel like he's got to show us something somewhat quickly. Anthony Kay, Davis Martin, Eric Fetty.
You know who my favorite is of the 5 now?
Of those 5?
Yeah. Anthony Kay.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm surprised. I thought you came around on Shane Smith.
I brought him in, but I think Anthony Kay is above him. I, at one point, had no Chicago White Sox starters in my top 150. Now, I have no Chicago White Sox pitchers in my top 100, but I have Smith and Kay in the 100 to 150 range somewhere.
Yeah, so McDougal is interesting to me just because I think they really need to make a quick decision on some of those veterans. If they want to just show that they're better. At the same time, 15 starts at AA last year.
Shane Smith could be a great closer, dude. He has a really good fastball.
Yeah, I mean, but they're going to keep trying to see if he can develop more pitches as a starter, like with the situation they've got.
I think Eric Fetty could be held on by a little bit. I don't know how to describe it. Just toenails, fingernails, whatever.
Yeah, so I guess I'll say McDougal's intriguing to me. I'm still not sure I'm committing a roster spot to waiting it out because we had to wait a long time for Bubba Chandler last year, and that was a situation where I thought we could connect the dots and see a fast promotion. I think we had more confidence in Chandler as a prospect, even though we like McDougal. But he's the one where I'm like, really? They sent him down? Like, they didn't want to just give him a chance? It's probably because he hasn't pitched a AAA yet. So maybe it's only 4 or 5 starts. Maybe it's a month, and he's up. So maybe more of a watch list guy for me than a draft and stash guy. Also very disappointed the Nats sent Harry Ford down. Like, for 2 catcher leagues, he was going to be the sleeper that I wanted late to make up for my mistakes. The Bo Naylor situation you described earlier, I was using Harry Ford that way, hoping he would take over, and he got sent down.
Yeah, he could be back soon too. I don't know. I think that might be a waiver game situation too. I mean, who's the other guy they picked? I'm sorry. I'm supposed to know all the names, and I tried to, but I did not know the name of the backup catcher for the Nationals that they picked over Harry Ford. I was surprised by that name.
I believe it's Drew Mias.
I had never heard of that person before.
Yeah.
Let's see. Does he have options? He has one option. So they just picked him over him. He has a 46% strikeout rate this spring. Why did they pick him over Harry Ford? Defense?
Could be defense. Yeah, I mean, Ford didn't go crazy with the bat in the spring, and he was away for a little bit. Team Great Britain. I don't know. It's a bit of a mystery to me, but I thought they'd give him a shot right away. So, here's some breaking news before we go. Zebby Matthews on that list of guys headed down to AAA. Yeah.
Mick Abel passed him. Knew it. I did that in the last rankings. I pushed Abel over Zebby. I got some other ones wrong. Just real quickly, some verbal cleanup on my rankings that just came out. Kyle Leahy, put him mentally around where Richard Fitz goes. I moved Trey Yesavage down, like I said. I forget what else I did, but maybe give Abel another 5-10 innings and maybe push him up a couple ranks.
Yeah, clearly the guy that appears to be the new back-end number 5 starter for the Twins had a fantastic spring, so could be impactful even down to 12-team leagues. It would not surprise me given what we've seen from Mick Abel so far. We are going to go big week on tap with the start of the season just around the corner. Have a great weekend. Good luck with any drafts you have between now and then. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Monday.
Thanks for listening.